That was beautiful. Sorry, I forgot. I have a short memory. Don't I? Our scripture is taken from Psalm 136 this morning. And I'd like to do this in a way that traditionally I grew up doing. Psalm 136, you'll see up there in a little bit, and there is a call and a response. So I'll say the first line, and you say the second line. And your part is easy because it's the same thing. It's just that one line, and you will see. So I will say, "Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good," and you will say,
"For God's steadfast love endures forever."
"Oh, give thanks to the God of gods,
For God's steadfast love endures forever.
Oh, give thanks to the Lord of lords,
For God's steadfast love endures forever.
who alone does great wonders,
For God's steadfast love endures forever.
who by understanding made the heavens,
For God's steadfast love endures forever.
who spread out the earth on the waters,
For God's steadfast love endures forever.
who made the great lights,
For God's steadfast love endures forever.
and the sun to rule over the day,
For God's steadfast love endures forever.
the moon and the stars to rule over the night,
For God's steadfast love endures forever.
who struck Egypt through their firstborn,
For God's steadfast love endures forever.
who brought Israel out from among them,
For God's steadfast love endures forever.
with a strong hand and an outstretched arm,
For God's steadfast love endures forever.
who divided the Red Sea in two,
For God's steadfast love endures forever.
and made Israel pass through the midst of it,
For God's steadfast love endures forever.
but overthrew Pharaoh and his army in the Red Sea,
For God's steadfast love endures forever.
who led his people through the wilderness,
For God's steadfast love endures forever.
who struck down great kings
For God's steadfast love endures forever.
and killed famous kings,
For God's steadfast love endures forever.
Sihon, king of the Amorites,
For God's steadfast love endures forever.
and Og, king of Bashan,
For God's steadfast love endures forever.
and gave their land as a heritage,
For God's steadfast love endures forever.
a heritage to his servant Israel.
For God's steadfast love endures forever.
It is he who remembers us in our lowest state
For God's steadfast love endures forever.
and rescues us from our foes,
For God's steadfast love endures forever.
who gives food to all flesh.
For God's steadfast love endures forever.
Oh, give thanks to the God of heaven.
For God's steadfast love endures forever.
Here ends the reading of God's holy word. Amen. I'm going to sit down for this one if that's okay. The church I grew up in had a service every Thanksgiving morning, and we would go to it every single year. And every year we read this particular scripture in the liturgical call and response the way that we did this morning. And I gotta be honest, as a 10-year-old kid sitting in a pew, or even a 30-year-old adult sitting in a pew, this psalm was long and boring and repetitive. By the time I hit verse 10, I was thinking about turkey and mashed potatoes and tater tot casserole and just waiting for the family gathering to begin. When I said this psalm, I was just repeating the words in a monotone voice, and it meant nothing to me. I was kind of on autopilot. Can you relate to that? This psalm that we read this morning was used for worship services, and it was used exactly how we read it today in ancient times. It was a call and a response. And the priest would say the first part, and the response was, God's steadfast love endures forever. And today, when people read this song, many tune out and dismiss this song as just a worship song that they just repeat that part over and over again. And it's just a psalm that some priest wrote in ancient times. But there is a story embedded in this song. A song that meant something to ancient readers. And I want to take a look at it a little bit more closely today. The first 3 verses kind of set God up. We're going to back up a little bit. The first 3 verses set God up as the ultimate God, the Lord of Lords, the God of gods, top God. And then verses 4 through 9. And I'm going to just do the first part of it so that you can just maybe see more of the story a little bit. Who alone does great wonders, who by understanding made the heavens, who spread out the earth on the waters, who made the great lights, the sun to rule over the day, the moon and stars to rule over the night. We're going to stop there. What do these verses remind you of? Where have you heard this before? The creation story, right? Mm-hmm. In Genesis 1 it says, in the beginning. And the writer of this psalm starts there. He starts with their beginning, or what they know the beginning to be. Now, this story of creation is interpreted in many ways. Some believe the story literally, that it actually happened. And some believe that the story is a metaphor. It's an ancient story. And there are a lot of people who believe various places in between. Now, wherever you stand on this, that is fine. But what I want to make clear is that this story is important to the writer because it talks about God's character. God's character is important to the Israelites. It's not necessarily whether it's literal or metaphorical. It's that God's character shines through this story. To know God was in the beginning, the creator of everything, the controller of everything, and in the beginning when creation was formed, God was there. And God's steadfast love was there, and it endured. We're going to do verses 10 through 15. Who struck Egypt through their firstborn, and brought Israel out from among them, with a strong hand and an outstretched arm, who divided the Red Sea in two, and made Israel pass through the midst of it, but overthrew Pharaoh and his armies in the Red Sea. What story is this?
The splitting of the sea.
The Exodus and the splitting of the Red Sea. The story, it's basically the book of Exodus, which is basically the second book in the Bible. Israel becomes enslaved by Egypt, and God raises a leader named Moses to lead Israel out of Egypt and out of slavery and into the desert, across the Red Sea and away from Pharaoh. Okay, now here's where it gets a little bit harder. Verses 16 through 22. Who led his people through the wilderness, who struck down great kings and killed famous kings, Sihon the king of the Amorites and Og the king of Bashan, and gave their land as a heritage to his servant Israel. This was their battles when they entered the promised land. After wandering in the desert, God leads the Israelites into the promised land, and this land was occupied by other people and other tribes, and so they had to fight for land. And their stories were written down in the book of Joshua. Now again, some believe these battle stories actually happened. Some believe that these are just stories. And still others believe that there might be some truth to it, but maybe that was exaggerated. Whatever you believe about that, that's okay. Because how literal isn't the point. The point is what the story is trying to say. The Israelites viewed God as being with them in the hard times and in the battles, in times when they didn't think they were going to succeed. God's steadfast love endured for them. And it gets a little bit harder. Verses 23 through 26. It is God who remembered us in our lowest state, and rescued us from our foes, who gives food to all flesh. Oh, give thanks to the God of heaven. Some scholars think that this psalm was written while Israel was in exile in Babylon. It was one of the lowest points of Israel's history, and they were waiting to someday come home to rebuild Jerusalem and to rebuild the temple. This is Israel's story. From Genesis to the end of the prophets, pretty much the Old Testament, and it's put into one song. And it was birthed with in the lowest time in their history, one of the saddest points of their story. Can you imagine a Levite priest whose job was it to care for the temple of God in the middle of Zion, the city of David, is now sitting in a foreign city far from home? The temple is gone. Zion is destroyed. The city of David left in a rubble. And this person, who is now forced to identify with something other than what he was created to be, which was a priest, writes this song, never thinking it would ever be sung in temple courts, never thinking it would be sung in Jerusalem. But years later, here it is. It's their song. It is a testament to God's unwavering love and commitment to Israel. Since the beginning of creation, God's steadfast love endured. Through the exodus from slavery, God's steadfast love endured. Through the battles of settling into the promised land, God's steadfast love endured. Through the exile, the destruction, and pain, God's steadfast love endured. And it ends with, oh, give thanks to the God of heaven, for God's steadfast love endures forever. Historically, there are a lot of ethical questions that come up when I read the Old Testament. An angry God that likes to destroy other tribes and people groups is troublesome. It messes with my head a little bit. But we need to remember that the author of this psalm is an Israelite. And the writer has a certain perspective that was not objective. It was subjective to the world that he lived in. It was subjective to his worldview, and it was subjective to the tribe that he was part of. And that was the tribe of Israel. This was his story. A story he felt needed to be written down and sang as a reminder to other Israelites that God is faithful and that God's love endures no matter what we go through. And reading this makes me wonder, what would this psalm sound like if I wrote it? What would be my beginning? What would be my slavery in Egypt? What would be my promised land or my exile? Where would I see God's steadfast love enduring in my life? So I took a shot at it. And I took this psalm and I rewrote it from my perspective. So I need your help. Remember that echoing part? Gotta do it again. You ready? Now the first 4 verses are the same. And then it goes into my story. So it says, oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good.
God's steadfast love endures forever.
Oh, give thanks to the God of gods.
God's steadfast love endures forever.
Oh, give thanks to the Lord of lords.
God's steadfast love endures forever.
Who alone does great wonders in my life.
For God's steadfast love endures forever.
Here's where it gets different. Who has known me since the day I was born.
For God's steadfast love endures forever.
Who set me in a good and loving family.
For God's steadfast love endures forever.
Who made sure my mom got me up every Sunday to go to church.
For God's steadfast love endures forever.
Who gave me teachers as an example of how I should live.
For God's steadfast love endures forever.
Who gave me brothers and sisters to keep me in line.
For God's steadfast love endures forever.
Who protected me when I made poor decisions.
For God's steadfast love endures forever.
Who kept me safe when I walked home alone at night in downtown Minneapolis.
For God's steadfast love endures forever.
Who provided me with a good job.
For God's steadfast love endures forever.
Who stayed with me when I was wrongly accused.
For God's steadfast love endures forever.
Who loved me when friends walked away.
For God's steadfast love endures forever.
And showed me a pathway to serving God.
For God's steadfast love endures forever.
Even though someone like me isn't supposed to.
For God's steadfast love endures forever.
Who defends me when people protest.
For God's steadfast love endures forever.
And sits with me when I cry.
For God's steadfast love endures forever.
Who grieves with me when I miss loved ones.
For God's steadfast love endures forever.
Who reminds me that I am not alone.
For God's steadfast love endures forever.
And gives me new friends.
For God's steadfast love endures forever.
Surrounds me with love.
For God's steadfast love endures forever.
It is God who remembers me wherever I am.
For God's steadfast love endures forever.
And rescues me from injustice.
For God's steadfast love endures forever.
Who supplies all my needs.
For God's steadfast love endures forever.
And the last verse is the same. Oh, give thanks to the God of heaven. For God's steadfast love endures forever. God's position is not dependent on my condition. And I want to say that again. God's position as God, the one that we've talked about the last few weeks, being the keeper, being the refuge, being that strong, unwavering, stable foundation. God's position is not dependent on my condition. So that no matter what I go through, whether it be good times, hard times, sad times, unbelievably painful times, God is still that God who I can trust and depend on. God's steadfast love endures forever. So let me ask you this. If you were to rewrite this psalm and reflect on your own life, how would it sound? My friends at Union Congregational, God knows your story. God has walked with you through every high and every low, every proud moment and every shameful moment. God's steadfast love endured through the good and the bad and the ugly. God's steadfast love was there and is there and will always be there. What would be your psalm that you sing to God? My challenge for you this week is to take this psalm and rewrite it for your life. And I think with this being Thanksgiving week, that I think it's appropriate to remember and think about how God has been faithful and steadfast and foundational through everything that you have been through. Give thanks to the God of heaven, for God's steadfast love endures forever. Amen.
Amen.